Hello, and welcome to my presentation on our Scaling the Trans-Alaskan Pipeline project. I'm Frederick Thorstensen, a senior in the University of Alaska Southeast Geography program. For this project, I mostly focused on the categories of materials and globalization, but there was definite crossover into the other categories due to the interconnectedness of all things, and we each touched on some COVID-19 concerns linked to oil as well. Towards the end of the course, I worked on a pin that compared the changing phases in public attitudes regarding oil catastrophes, which were documented in Catherine Morse's article, There Will Be Birds, Images of Oil Disasters in the 19th and 20th Centuries, with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 Stages of Grief. While reflecting on those pieces and the pin, I was struck by the realization that I can also plot my own personal relationship with oil along a similar trajectory, from where I began to where I feel that I am now. My family's lived in Alaska since around the year 1900, when my great-great-grandfather, Edward Reynoldson, was a U.S. Marshal in Eagle, Alaska during the times of Judge Wickersham. And by the time that I entered the scene in October of 1972, a lot of the pieces were already in play. And I encourage everyone to please go and view Hope's video on the prehistory of the pipeline if you haven't done so already. She covers the material in a lot greater depth than I will, but I would like to set the stage with what I think are a few key moments. The discovery of oil in Prudhoe Bay in 1968 was the turning point, in my opinion, for all the future impacts to the state of Alaska and the people who have chosen to live here. In shaping the politics and economy of the state and our day-to-day lives, at least until the recent COVID pandemic changed everything in ways that we still aren't sure of. Following the discovery of oil on the North Slope, the question became, how would they get the oil to market? It was inaccessible and was hundreds of miles from a viable port. The concept of the 800-mile-long, $900 million Trans-Alaskan pipeline, which terminated in Valdez, was conceived of but was protested and was considered too expensive to construct until the next turning point occurred. The 1973 oil embargo by the OPEC nations and the subsequent gasoline crisis that occurred while I was still an infant was enough of an impetus for the U.S. government to break the stalemate and give the go-ahead for construction of what would come to be called one of the 7 wonders of the United States, and stands as one of history's most difficult engineering feats. I did a series of pins that I invite you to check out on the 20 modular camp cities and the 11 pump stations that were installed along the route to enable roughly 28,000 workers to build the pipeline in 3 years and 2 months. According to the August 2, 1977 edition of the New York Times, the first oil flowed into a waiting tanker in Valdez on August 1, 1977. Now here's where I start to get more personally involved in the story. In 1976, Governor Jay Hammond sponsored the Alaska Permanent Fund, where at least 25% of the earned oil money was going to be invested and held in trust for Alaskan residents, with a portion paid out as a dividend check each fall. The first check was awarded in 1982 when I was 10 years old, in the amount of $1,000. My awareness of oil grew to include the knowledge that my parents were saving my share in an account that I would receive after I graduated from high school to use for my college education, which leads me into the denial phase of my relationship with oil. As an Alaskan, I was proud of our oil wealth, and since our environment still seemed very pristine, even though I loved nature, I could not at all be considered an environmentalist and definitely had the drill baby drill attitude. This is a picture of me as a 17-year-old hoodlum with my gas-guzzling 1968 Dodge Charger. Clearly, I was a Dukes of Hazzard fan. I find it an interesting coincidence that 1968 was the same year that oil was discovered in Prudhoe Bay. I was too caught up in my own self-absorption as a hot-rodding teenager to fully recognize the effects of the Exxon Valdez oil spill when it happened. And it wasn't until I started attending the University of Alaska Anchorage in 1991 and met some people from Cordova who had lived through the experience and whose families had lost their livelihoods and their entire way of life due to the spill that I started to wake up to the reality of oil and entered into the anger phase of my relationship. At the time, it was the largest oil spill in U.S. waters, and people actually died while waiting for their settlement from Exxon due to the many appeals they made to the jury-awarded decision. It wasn't until December 15, 2009, about 20 years later, that they had fully paid the $507.5 million in total damages, which was much reduced from the $5.25 billion originally awarded to the plaintiffs. This is a disgusting and shameful accounting, in my opinion. Still, this was not enough to cause me to break off my relationship with oil. Sure, there might be a lot of cons, but look at all the pros. I mean, it was the only game in town, right? How else would the state of Alaska survive? How else would we be able to travel? We deserve our PFD checks, don't we? These are the many ways I bargained with myself to look past all of the many wrongs and abuses carried out by big oil. It wasn't until just this past year that my toxic relationship with oil hit rock bottom. When I made the fateful decision to return to college and finally finish up my last year at the University of Alaska Southeast between 2019 and 2020. In the fall of 2019, I enrolled in a seminar course taught by Sonia Nagorski on plastic and microplastic in the environment. It was a very depressing eye-opener to the extent that the world is being impacted by a material made out of oil. In the spring of 2020, I enrolled in the geography seminar taught by Richard Simpson, and the topic of oil was, coincidentally, chosen again. After these courses, I now see plastic everywhere, and where I see plastic, I see oil. As a result of my newfound awareness of the impact of oil on all aspects of our society, I have finally reached the acceptance phase. I have personally pledged to cut down on my plastic consumption as much as possible and to encourage others to do the same. It is still a looming problem, but hopefully the combination of a growing body of scientific literature on the topic, combined with the growing public awareness, will provide the political will to take necessary actions before it is too late. I have also pledged to reduce my carbon footprint and have made the shift away from using heating oil to heat my house as the primary heating source. Electric heat supplied by hydropower now seems like the more environmentally friendly option, and my family will be making the shift to electric vehicles as well as soon as we can. I have a lot of red in my ledger when it comes to balancing the impacts I have personally contributed due to my part in the oil story. I will seek to amend that by taking these concerns into account when making responsible choices in the future. Thank you very much for your interest in our project, Scaling the Trans-Alaskan Oil Pipeline. Thank you to our teacher, Professor Richard Simpson, and the Geography Seminar class for their guidance and work on this project. Good luck and good health to you all.